There could be, much as we've seen with the minimum wage, geographic differentials.
Okay, so if you're a state employee working in the town of Ithaca, but then there's in the town of Ithaca a municipal employee doing a very similar job, but it's two different determinations.
I mean, but those would not be weighed against each other. I suppose anyone can take out a lawsuit anytime they want it, but it's to match the locals with the locals and the state level with the state level by sex, and that's why.
And I think that's where I'm having a hard time with this, because if we're looking at jobs and comparative worth of jobs, wouldn't it make sense that the secretary who's determined to be the same as the truck driver at the state level in that same geographic area, wouldn't that apply to the municipal employees as well? And if not, you're creating a lot of confusion nonetheless, which to me would create a lot of lawsuits.
You know, municipalities can create their own title series independent of the state, so that's what their report would be.
Okay, so if that state employee says, well, in the local town of Ithaca, it may apply to them, but it won't apply to me, that would stand up in court.
You know, if they're different jobs, yes.
Okay, so then we'll have secretaries in some subdivisions of the state being measured as being equivalent to, say, a truck driver.
I mean, you're supposing that this doesn't happen now, right?
Well, I mean, my whole problem right now is that I don't think it's reasonable to try to measure different types of jobs and call them equivalent or comparable in terms of worth. I think worth is a very subjective term that we're trying to put a number to, and I think that's a virtually impossible thing to do. But certainly when you're talking about doing it at the state level and at the local level, now you're drawing comparisons between people doing the same jobs in the same geographic area. They just happen to have a different employer, both of them being public. So I think this could create a lot of confusion.
I think you're going beyond the intent of this bill, and this bill's intent is to make sure that women and men are measured equally on comparable value and worth.
Well, certainly I understand what your intentions are, and I appreciate that. Again, like I said, I think it's important when we pass any kind of legislation that we look at the way the bill would be implemented, and these are one of those issues that I think is of concern. But thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. I appreciate your comments. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, Ms. Corwin.
Again, like our last bill, this one applying only to public employees, the last one to public and private, I still see some serious concerns with the bill. And I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit, too. When we talk about this whole issue of wage parity, I think it's important to note, as was stated early on in previous comments, that women make less money than men in the same job, and the numbers do prove that out. However, what that study doesn't do is it doesn't take into consideration outside factors. For example, women who stop their careers or interrupt their careers for long periods of time and then re-enter the workforce. That has a huge impact on their wages because it impacts the amount of experience they have. What I've always said, and I said this last year in our debate on these same bills, is that I think if we want to get wage parity, if we want to have women having the same pay as men in the same jobs, then certainly what we should be doing is looking at issues like child care. Issues that would help women to not have to interrupt their career. And if you look at it now, you look at young people who've gone through the recession, personal economics have certainly come a long way in impacting the way women and men are paid. And because now they are both more involved in the workplace, and women aren't interrupting their careers as readily as they used to. There are studies that prove that out. Again, I think that addressing those kinds of issues, and I think those issues were raised by the Shriver report, which was done in 2009, talking about women's lack of equal pay. And what they are saying here is they didn't recommend trying to implement some sort of equivalent of work formula. What they recommended doing was trying to help families when it comes to child care and those kinds of issues so women don't have to leave the workforce for extended periods of time. So that's why I would recommend that is a much better solution. It's certainly something that's much more workable. And I would recommend that we move in that direction instead of trying to come up with some arbitrary way of making different jobs look equal when in fact it's almost impossible to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Will you yield, Ms. Rosenthal?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenthal yields.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. Is there anything in the existing civil service law or any other statute affecting the state of New York that would prohibit the governor and the State Civil Service Commission for addressing any perceived wage disparities now?
No. Huh? No, there is nothing that would prevent anyone from, governor or whoever, from implementing it now.
So the governor has the full authority to correct any perceived disparities under current law.
I mean, I don't write his job title and requirements, but yes.
Now, we've had Democrat governors for the last 10 years, and while I may have my disagreements with Governor Cuomo, I've never had the sense that he in any way supported wage discrimination against women or minorities of any kind. Is that your same sense?
This is not exactly on a question on the bill, is it?
Well, my question is, how great of a problem is it that requires us to pass a bill directing our governor and the State Civil Service Commission to do this analysis?
Well,
and I never had the sense that he was discriminatory in his nature, but certainly, and I didn't realize there was a big issue. Is there a big issue that justifies this bill?
Sorry, that's exactly why this bill directs that a report be outlined so we can see exactly what the situation is.
Wouldn't it make sense that before we require future legislatures to fund corrective action, we get the report to first evaluate what that would cost and the nature and extent of the issue?
That's what we're doing.
So this bill doesn't require corrective action?
If there's a disparity, then it would require corrective action. But first, we have to determine what the disparity is, how great it is, and then there would be corrective action taken.
Okay, so this says, well, do the report, and whatever that report says, regardless of the cost, we have to fix it.
I'm sorry, I say the last thing again?
This bill requires that regardless of the cost or the nature or extent of the problem, we have to fix it.
We have to fix it because it's something that is does not adhere to equal pay.
Now, this bill provides, as have other bills, that the state couldn't reduce a salary that might be too high in order to eliminate the discrepancy. Can the state, under this bill, freeze the higher salary indefinitely until the lower salary comes up into parity?
The discrepancy has to be fixed. I can't say if that would entail freezing or not.
Does this legislature, by the way, have the legal authority to bind future legislatures on any future budget vote?
I don't believe that's what this bill is doing.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I thought it said that future legislatures would have to correct the disparity and would have to provide the funding to do so. Did I misread that?
No, we're requiring...
I'm looking at page 3, by the way. I'm looking at page 3, line 35 and 36. The governor shall include the appropriation necessary to correct the problem.
Okay, that is true. That is true.
So my question then is, isn't it clear under the state constitution? I know I hate bringing up that pesky little document, but isn't it true that we can't bind future legislatures, or even the governor, for that matter?
When it pertains to this particular bill, this is something the governor can address in future budgets, which we then get to negotiate and vote on.
And if the governor doesn't include the appropriation, shame on him?
We will negotiate that.
Okay. Is there a private right of action? Can employees sue the state or local government?
Not in this bill.
Now, I note this bill specifically mentions wage disparities as a result of mergers, takeovers, transfers of state workforce from one title to another title.
Can you write it down?
This is a particular concern to me because it also applies to local governments. And one of the challenges that you have if you're merging local governments is they typically will take, like the police department that merges into a sheriff's department, and they guarantee that the current employees don't lose money. But the merged departments can have very different wage bases. Will the merger then trigger this and result in a forced increase in compensation to the successor municipality? Well, that's my question. Doesn't this force the successor merge, the remaining municipality to equalize all those wages?
Well, no, they have to produce a report. So if they merge, then they have to do a report on the merged agencies.
And then they have
job
to correct it,
titles.
right?
Sorry?
And then they have to correct it.
It has to be corrected, yes.
And we're directing the governor to put the appropriation in. Is the governor required to put an appropriation in?
Not for local.
Okay, so it's clear then that the governor has to put an appropriation as it might relate to state employees,
Yes,
but not an appropriation to cover the cost for local governments
That's
to
right.
comply.
that's right.
Do we have an idea of how much this unfunded mandate will be on local governments?
You know, we really have to see this report to see what the outcome is, and we'll take it from there.
So we adopt it first and then find out later what the cost is?
You know, if we knew, we could just order it to be done, or it would be done, but we don't know, because there hasn't been a report done in many, many years.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rosenthal. I
You're welcome.
appreciate your comments on the bill.
On the bill, Mr. Goodell.
I think fiscal prudence dictates that we know the nature and extent of the issue and the cost facing state government and local governments before we pass a bill that obligates the state taxpayers. And then once we do that report and we know the exact nature and extent of the problem and the cost, then we can intelligently plan our budget so that we can phase in or fund as necessary the costs on the local governments and on the state government. And while no one here, including when I say here, I mean in Albany, no one in the Assembly, no one in the Senate, and I dare say not the governor, supports wage disparity, we need to proceed in a thoughtful, careful, measured approach so that we know what the issue is, we study it, we evaluate it, we develop a plan. It's not the right idea, in my opinion, to first say we're going to pay whatever it takes. We don't know that cost, we don't know the extent of the problem, and we're going to force local governments to foot the bill, and they can deal with the budget fallouts later, but make sure you stay within the tax cap, right? So I would support studying the issue, and then from that report, taking the necessary corrective action. But I don't support obligating the governor, to the extent you can under the Constitution, in making an appropriation and sticking all the local governments with what could be a substantial unfunded mandate. For that reason, I'll be voting against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Goodell. Ms. Peoples-Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for a question?
Will you yield, Ms. Rosenthal?
Yes.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. When the study is complete and all the data has been looked at, will it also analyze the difference in the amount of money the female could have earned had her job description been equal and her salary been equal?
It doesn't look at back pay, but it's probably something we could calculate, you know, knowing the different titles and categories, but it doesn't, you know, put the back pay necessarily on the report.
Okay, I think that's an important piece of information to have as well, but I do want to commend the sponsor on this bill and certainly look forward to supporting it. I think that, you know, very often when people are not paid fairly, they end up relying on the government for some parts of their lives to be made whole. That includes daycare, food stamps, and other sort of amenities. So I really think that if we can look at the value of those numbers between the difference of what they should have gotten and what they didn't get, then perhaps we can see not only how much we're going to save in the future by making sure they get paid fairly, but certainly how much the government has already expended on their services. So I want to commend the sponsor on this piece of legislation, and I look forward to it voting in the affirmative.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
The clerk will record the vote. Ms. Rosenthal to explain her vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, it is unacceptable that the women in our state struggle to make ends meet, that the hardworking mothers in our state struggle to put food on the table and to provide for their families. It is unacceptable that women in this state make 87 cents for every dollar made by men. For women of color, that number is even lower. African American women in New York make 66 cents for every dollar made by white men. And Latina women make 56 cents for every dollar made by white men. We cannot let this status quo continue. We debate these bills every year. Every year we have the same conversation about how equal pay for equal work has been the law in the country for more than 50 years. Yet women still make less than men for the same work. This year I sponsor this bill to help the hardworking mothers and women, to help get them out of poverty, to ensure they receive pay commensurate with their work and their skills, not pay based on their sex. It's an absolute necessary measure to ensure that the hardworking women in our state aren't condemned to poverty because of their gender. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, I vote yes on this bill and urge my colleagues to do the same.
Ms. Rosenthal in the affirmative. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 82, noes 34.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing a brief interruption so that I might inform members of the Racing and Wagering Committee that we'd like to hold a meeting in the Speaker's conference room. Mr. Pretlow is at the ready. Racing and Wagering in the Speaker's conference room.
Racing and Wagering, Speaker's Conference Room. Please meet Mr. Pretlow.
Assembly 5008A, Calendar 197, Ms. Lifton, an act directing the President of the Civil Service Commission to study and publish a report evaluating wage disparities among public employers.
An explanation is requested. Ms. Lifton.
Happy to do that, Mr. Speaker. This legislation would establish a state policy that there should be equitable compensation relationships between female-dominated, male-dominated, and other segregated titles to eliminate wage disparities in public employment. It would also direct the President of the State Civil Service Commission to study and publish a report evaluating the existence of wage disparities among public employers related to job titles of equal or equivalent value that are segregated by sex, race, and/or national origin. And they would also have to report to the legislature and the governor and put forward a plan to remedy any disparities.
Ms. Corwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Will you yield, Ms. Lifton?
I will, Mr. Speaker.
Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes. So this bill essentially just requires a study and a report be done looking at these various job titles. We didn't get into it with the other bills, but they've been referenced in all three of them in terms of how that's done, using some sort of a point system.
Right.
Could you just explain to me how that point system would actually be implemented?
Well, not able to get into the weeds on that, but there are various kinds of systems that human resource people use. One that's well known is called the Hay system that the state of Minnesota used that assigns points based on the same issues that we've been talking about: skills, education, responsibility, working conditions, and so on.
So it's each job is being given.
But there are other systems as well, I understand.
I see. But each job classification or each job would be given some sort of a measurement.
Correct.
10, 55%, whatever, something like that.
Or some sort of rubric that gives various measures, and you end up with some sort of consistent measure.
Sure.
Based on different kinds of circumstances.
Sure. I guess my concern when it comes to these reports, they sound fairly innocuous, but what we're doing is basically saying, we're trying to compare, say, truck drivers and secretaries and saying, well, these are similar for various reasons. I'm using that just as an example because it's quick and easy. What happens when they're assigned a number, and then there are other job classifications that are assigned a different number that might be lower or different? Is there any opportunity here where maybe someone who's a secretary is feeling like, well, I'm not valued as much as other people because my number in the system is different than somebody else's?
Well, there is some sort of assignment based on the level of responsibility, you know, how much, whether they have supervisory responsibility over other people, what the working conditions are. You cited an example with secretaries and word processors where it seemed to me there were issues perhaps of working conditions, the amount of stress someone had. All that is measurable. And you can assign numbers to it and therefore assign an appropriate wage to that.
Okay,
but these things, you know, are handled very informally now. This is a way of trying to do some measurement around it that brings some more fairness into it in ways that we know need to happen.
Well, sure, I understand the intention again, but my argument here is you're trying to quantify something that is much more subjective than that. And talking about the word processors and the secretaries, is that, their jobs may be different because one is a little more tedious, so that person's number that person is assigned a number that is higher than other people.
Perhaps.
Is the perception that that person is more important to the operation of the organization than somebody else with a lower number?
You're sort of talking about cultural issues here and how employers communicate the value. I assume any employer is going to communicate the value of all of their employees, but I think everyone understands that there are different wage rates and different wage levels, and they're based on those same things that we all talk about. At least there are some objective measures rather than simply based on whether you happen to be male or happen to be a female or happen to be a person who's Caucasian or a person who's a person of color, rather than being on some more arbitrary way. At least they're based on something that we can look at and measure in some sort of fair way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Barbara. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, Ms. Cohen.
As I've said before, value is something that's in the eyes of the beholder. I think when it comes to jobs, the work that people do, they take a lot of pride in the work they do, and they like to feel that they are a contributing member of the organization and that the piece or the part that they play is important to the overall organization. I think an unintended consequence of this quantifying or attempting to quantify various different jobs is that you'll ultimately end up with employees who work side by side with others in the organization, and they're going to be given different numbers based on a value. So now all of a sudden that person who thought, well, I'm making a contribution to this organization, well, I'm not as valuable to the organization as this other person who's getting a higher number, where those higher numbers might be based on various circumstances. Again, I just think that we're trying to quantify something that is much more subjective. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to end up hurting employees more than it's going to end up helping them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 92, noes 31.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members have on their desks an A calendar. I now move to advance the A calendar.
On Mr. Morelli's motion, the A calendar is advanced. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, sir. If we could go to page 3 of that A calendar and take up the following two bills. Rules Report number 33 by Ms. Simotis, followed by Rules Report number 34 by Ms. Jaffe.
Clerk will read.
Assembly 9754, Rules Report Number 33, Ms. Simotas, an act to amend the Civil Service Law.
An explanation is requested, Ms. Simotis. We need some clearing of the corner. Excuse me. The member is debating.
Amend Section 115 of the Civil Service Law to clarify New York's long-held policy of equal pay for equal work and that it applies to all state employees. Recently, the Court of Appeals settled a split between the first and the third departments about whether state employees can sue in state court when they are not being compensated fairly. The Court of Appeals agreed with the third department that Section 115 merely states a policy and does not provide a cause of action for public employees. As we know, since 1966, private employees have been able to go to state court and sue when they believe that they're not being compensated fairly. This bill ensures that all state employees have the same rights as private employees and can seek redress in state court when they're not being compensated fairly.
Mr. McKevitt.
Sure. Will the sponsor yield for a few questions?
Will you yield, Ms. Simotis?
Of course I yield.
Sponsor yields.
Just going back to the case you're talking about, this was actually a Court of Appeals case from a couple of years ago, and it did not actually deal with sex discrimination, but actually chose to deal with a union regarding subway surface supervisors. But what the point of the case was is they tried an action based upon equal pay for equal work. And what the court said is even though the civil service law provides as a policy, you don't actually have a private right of action to recover under the policy. Isn't that what the court held in that case?
It did, and it actually provided in dicta their opinion that it's been New York State's policy for many decades to have equal pay for equal work, but that in fact that we do not provide a cause of action for state employees.
So then what this bill then does is not change any of the substantive policies regarding equal pay and equal work, but just gives one additional mechanism for, I guess, employees and public unions to go and seek a redress in the courts for that to occur.
Absolutely, and it also makes sure that a certain subsection of employees, public employees, who are management confidential, which we know, as we know, do not have the right to go and seek redress if they're not being compensated, if they're being discriminated against in their compensation. It allows them to go to court and seek redress. Right now, those public employees don't have any rights.
But my understanding is that those in private employees do. So what this
Yes, since 1966, there's been an explicit cause of action that allows anybody who's working for a private employer to go and sue if they feel they're being discriminated against in their pay.
So then all this is doing is giving the public employees the same rights that private employees currently have.
Absolutely. We're trying to make sure that we have parity between public and private employees.
Okay, thank you.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes?